Good morning. I welcome you back to our next segment on this series that is entitled Defining Moments of Essencology. I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, the founder of Essencology and also the founder and the president of Reverian Research Groups. And so we thank you again for joining us. And I want to get right into our segment for today. I want to talk about aphasia. Aphasia is not just common to Essencology, but the term aphasia can be discovered in the study of psychology, even psychiatric things, or psychoanalytic theory. Aphasia can be simply defined as a disorder which is characterized by an inability to articulate speech and to understand the meaning of written or spoken words. Now, when we look at this from an essencological point of view and a psychological point of view, aphasia then, for the psychologist, deals with a disorder of a certain part of the brain wherein the motor skills of reading, the ability to comprehend, eye and hand coordination, or understanding language comes from. And so in many cases, unless that psychologist happens to be a Christian psychologist who understands that man is more than, again, just physiological, chemical, and electrical impulses within the brain. To understand brain damage, or when we talk about disorders, we have to understand, again, that man is a living person. Man is a living soul. According to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7, God formed man out of the dust of the ground. He breathed into his nostrils, and man became a living soul, a soul that is sustained by unique pneumatic or spiritual energy, a soul then that is held in the stasis of the physiology through the spirit of life and those congenial receptors that were created in the body to receive the soul and to keep the living soul operable within the body. I don't want to get too complex because of lack of time, but when we talk again about the integration of the soul into the body, remember that the soul then is also the living person that is integrated within the somatic tool. And so the soul is centralized in the brain, but the soul as a living individual person expresses itself and its individuality through the physiological aspects of the soma. And so when we talk again about the soul and the brain connection, it is through the neural pathways that the person or the soul extends its desires, its understanding, its will, its cognition. And it is also through these neural pathways and the brain that the soul is able to register from each and every aspect of our sensory mechanisms to give us understanding of the external world. And so when we look at disorders that register specifically in the brain, we have to understand that because the living soul is now integrated within the nervous system as a whole, meaning the central nervous system, which deals with the very brain, maybe the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system that deals with all of those nerve endings and nerve branches that are connected to the spinal cord. So it's actually one nervous system that can be compounded into various operating systems that compose the nervous system. Without the peripheral nervous system, then the central nervous system could not receive any type of impulses that would make sense or register in the brain. And so aphasia then can be spoken of as a disorder wherein language, and the ability to speak language or understand language is inhibited. There have been three types of classifications of aphasia that have been distinguished by number one, motor or expressive aphasia, which is the inability to express ideals through speech. What happens is there's something going on in the brain, either some type of brain damage or some type of lack of development, some type of even, I believe, a pneumatic or a spiritual attack from a spiritual entity. And I don't want to go into that because in many cases, because the metaphysical realm is not dealt with, we totally rule that out, that there are entities that are extra dimensional that can impact our physiology, even our brain. And so motor expressive aphasia then is a condition which there is an inability to express ideals through speech. The concept of speech and speaking out or manifesting verbally cognitive ideals is hindered. Secondly, there is sensory aphasia. Sensory aphasia is called receptive aphasia, and it is the inability to comprehend the written or spoken word. Remember, there is one aphasia that deals with the inability to speak. Motor expressive aphasia means you might be able to comprehend it, but you cannot manifest it verbally. Then the expressive receptive aphasia, in which the language processes are limited, is the third kind. And so altogether we have the motor or expressive aphasia, which is the inability to express ideals through speech. Sensory aphasia, called receptive aphasia, which is the inability to comprehend the written or spoken words. And so even though you may have ideologies, when you see words, the conceptual ideations of the terminologies, the definitive understanding of words that are spoken or written, the mind cannot comprehend because the specific areas of the brain have been damaged or damaged by either some type of excess secretion of chemicals, sometimes underdevelopment of the brain, sometimes, again, there may be a blockage or there could have been something that caused the brain to overdevelop or to cause pustules or some type of malformation. And so the brain then is limited in what it can do concerning receiving understanding of the words that are spoken or written, and therefore the human mind or the human soul that is locked within the brain cannot receive the impulses from the mechanism by which hearing, sight, touch, and feel are supposed to reroute to us information that becomes usable information in the mind. In addition to disturbances resulting from structural abnormities, there are rare occurrences of loss of the ability to communicate resulting from severe emotional conflicts, which generally occur because of traumatic experiences. When this occurs, the soul then has been bombarded with so much toxic emotion, so much toxic information, that in order to keep itself from totally breaking down, the biophysical connection to the mind simply puts it on hold or pauses it. And this trauma, until the trauma is dealt with, will cause the mind to become unreceptive to specific type of information. And in many cases, this can go on for years. And because of neuroplasticity, if it is not corrected, there is a possibility, because of the undue stress or the inability of the mind to deal with the stress, it may sometimes literally fuse neural pathways and continue to cause the lack of ability to speech or to understand, conceptualize words or speaking. Aphasia is the result of, and generally, abnormalities of the brain, and may be due to injury at birth or damage later that takes place in life. And so aphasia, again, is the inability to understand through words, understand speech, and sometimes to not be able to speak those things that are thought in the mind. And so there are different levels of aphasia, different impacts of aphasia, different sources of aphasia. Again, sometimes it is caused by a physiological abnormality of the brain, and then sometimes it can be caused by a sensory overload because of a rush of impulses that are so disturbing and so thought-provocative, bringing fear and trauma, that the human mind shuts itself down. I wish I had time to go more into the details and to explore some of the deeper mechanisms for aphasia. But again, these are simply defining moments of Essencology. So I thank you for joining us. I am your host, Professor again of Essencology, Dr. Derek A. Reeves. And as always, we love you with the love of Jesus. God still reigns. Jesus is Lord, and Jesus is coming back again.